The Galactic Confederation had been at war for 11 years. 11 years of burning fleets, shattered moons, and dead planets that used to have names. 11 years of strategy meetings that went nowhere, of generals with 6 arms and 4 brains pointing at star maps and saying the same thing in different languages. We are losing. The enemy was called the Vreth. Nobody knew where they came from. Nobody knew what they wanted. What everybody knew, what every species in the Confederation had learned the hard way, was that the Vreth did not stop. They did not negotiate. They did not take prisoners. They came out of deep space in ships that looked like torn black cloth, and they burned everything they touched, and then they moved on to the next thing. The Thalorians lost 40 billion people in the first year. The Sec lost their homeworld in the second. By the 5th year, the Confederation had lost 1/3 of its territory. 9 member species had gone completely silent, and the word most commonly heard in the halls of the Grand Council was not strategy or hope, it was evacuation. That was the year the humans asked to join. Admiral Vesseron of the Thalorian High Command remembered the day clearly. She had 4 eyes, and all 4 of them had looked at the human delegation with something that was very close to pity. The humans were small, soft-skinned, no natural armor, no extra limbs, no bioelectric field, no chemical defense gland. Their planet was a medium-sized rock with thin atmosphere and enormous oceans, and they had only had faster-than-light travel for about 60 years. They had been watching the war from a distance, and now 3 of them stood in the council chamber looking up at beings that were twice their size and 10 times their age, and they wanted in. The lead human's name was Director Alara Voss. She was a short woman, with gray in her dark hair, and a way of standing very still, that Vesseran found slightly uncomfortable, though she could not say exactly why. "We want to contribute to the war effort," Voss said. The council was polite. The council was kind. The council explained, gently, that human military technology was roughly 300 years behind the current standard, that human soldiers, while apparently brave, were biologically fragile, that the Vreth had destroyed civilizations that were older and stronger than humanity by a margin that was genuinely hard to calculate. "We appreciate the offer," said Grand Speaker Olun, who was 900 years old, and had watched 11 civilizations fall in his lifetime. "But we do not believe your species has the capacity to change the outcome of this war." Director Voss nodded slowly. She did not argue. She asked one question. "Can we have a small sector of the front, somewhere you've already given up on, somewhere you don't need anymore?" The council looked at each other. There was a sector, Sector 7 Omicron, a dead zone, 3 systems, all compromised, all but abandoned. The Vreth had already swept through once, and were cycling back. There was nothing there worth defending. "You can have it," Olun said. He thought he was being kind. He thought he was giving the humans a place to feel useful before the war ended, and whatever was left of them could be folded into the evacuation columns with everyone else. He did not think about it again for 8 months. The first reports from Sector 7 Omicron came in on a Tuesday, Confederation Standard Time. The analyst who read them first was a young Sec named Preth, and she read them 3 times before she called her supervisor, because she was not sure her translation matrix was working correctly. "Sir," she said, "I'm getting anomalous data from the abandoned sector." Her supervisor, a tall Thalorian named Commander Jev, leaned over her screen. He read the report. He read it again. "The Vreth fleet in 7 Omicron," he said slowly. "It's gone?" "Not gone," Preth said. "Destroyed." Jev stared at the readout. The Vreth fleet that had been cycling through 7 Omicron had consisted of 47 ships, 47 black cloth vessels that had each survived direct hits from Confederation dreadnought cannons. The Confederation's best fleets had thrown everything they had at single Vreth ships and called it a victory when they managed to crack the hull. All 47 were gone. Not retreated. Destroyed. Wreckage confirmed. "What destroyed them?" Jev asked. Preth pointed at the bottom of the report. "The humans did." He looked at the line she was pointing at. Then he looked at the timeline of the engagement. Then he sat down in the nearest chair. 47 ships. Destroyed in 6 hours. "That's not possible," he said. "That's what the sensor data says." "What weapons did they use?" Preth pulled up the secondary report. She had already flagged it twice. "That's the part I don't understand, sir. The energy signatures don't match anything in our weapons database." Vesseran requested a meeting with Director Voss directly. It took 3 days to arrange. The humans were apparently busy. When Voss finally appeared on screen, she looked tired. There was a bruise on her jaw that had not been there 8 months ago, and she had cut her hair shorter, and there was something behind her eyes that Vesseran could not read, which was unusual. Vesseran was very good at reading species. "Congratulations are in order," Vesseran said carefully. "The fleet in 7 Omicron, that was a skirmish," Voss said. Vesseran blinked 2 of her 4 eyes. 47 Vreth ships. "A skirmish," Voss said again, pleasantly. "We're still setting up. Another few months and we'll be ready to push." Push. The words sat in the air between them. "Director Voss," Vesseran said, and she chose her words carefully. "The Confederation has been fighting the Vreth for 11 years. In that time, we have not once pushed. We have only ever retreated." Voss tilted her head. She had a very particular way of tilting her head. "With respect, Admiral, you've been fighting them the way you know how to fight. We're going to fight them the way we know how to fight. And what does that mean?" The exhausted woman on the screen looked at her for a moment. Then she said something that Vesseran would think about for the rest of her life. "We're going to send in the quiet ones." The quiet ones. In the weeks that followed, Vesseran tried to find out what that meant. She filed requests with the Human Liaison Office. She read everything available about human military history, which turned out to be extensive, complicated, and deeply alarming in places. Humans had been fighting each other for their entire recorded history. They had developed weapons and tactics and strategies in enormous variety. They had fought wars on land, in water, in the air, in space, in the dark, in the cold, underground, in jungles, in deserts, in cities, in the middle of the night. They had fought wars where the whole point was that the other side did not know they were being fought. She found references to things called special operations, unconventional warfare, covert action, terms that did not translate cleanly because the Confederation had no real equivalent. The closest concept was assassination, but that was not quite right. It was smaller than armies and larger than assassins. It was something else. She found a phrase that appeared in multiple human military documents across hundreds of years of history. When conventional forces cannot achieve the objective, you send in the ones who operate where ordinary rules don't apply. She thought about that for a long time. Then the second report came in from 7 Omicron, and she stopped thinking and started making emergency calls. The Vreth had a command structure. The Confederation had figured this out early, though it had not helped them much. At the top of the structure were entities the xenobiologists called commanders, massive, ancient Vreth that were barely mobile but seemed to coordinate the entire fleet through some form of biological signal. Kill a commander, and the fleet it controlled became momentarily disorganized. Not defeated, just confused. For maybe 20 minutes. No Confederation force had ever successfully reached a Vreth commander. The commanders were kept in the center of the fleet, surrounded by dozens of ships and thousands of soldiers, on vessels that were armored beyond anything the Confederation could reliably penetrate. The second report from 7 Omicron said that a Vreth commander was dead. Not the fleet, not the surrounding ships, just the commander, extracted from the center of a fully operational Vreth battle formation and killed. The report said the human team that had done it consisted of 8 people. 8. Vesseran sat with that number for a long time. She looked at the battle formation maps. She calculated the number of Vreth soldiers between the outer perimeter and the commander's vessel. She got a number somewhere above 12,000. 8 humans had gone in. 8 humans had come out. 1 Vreth commander was dead. She called Director Voss immediately. "How?" she asked. No preamble, no greeting. Voss looked at her from the screen, still tired, still that thing behind her eyes that Vesseran still could not name. "That's what they do," Voss said. 8 individuals, 12,000 enemy combatants, 1 high-value target extracted and eliminated. "Yes. How are they still alive?" Voss was quiet for a moment. "They train for a very long time," she said, "and they're very good at not being seen." "That's not an answer." "No," Voss agreed. "It isn't." What Vesseran did not know, what the entire Confederation did not know yet, was what happened inside that Vreth battle formation during the 8 hours the human team was in there. The Vreth had sensors that could detect body heat, electrical fields, chemical signatures, movement vibration. They had soldiers that could see in total darkness and smell organic matter from 50 meters. They had internal security protocols that had never been breached. The 8 humans had gone in wearing suits that absorbed heat signatures and dampened electrical fields. They had moved through ventilation systems too narrow for any Vreth soldier to follow. They had communicated in a hand signal language they had practiced for 10,000 hours, until it was as fast and fluent as speech. They had waited, actually waited, motionless, for 4 hours, inside a gap in the hull plating, 12 centimeters wide, while a Vreth patrol passed 2 meters below them. They had not made a single sound. They had killed 17 Vreth soldiers in total, in 8 hours, and not one of those kills had been discovered until the team was already gone, because they had moved the bodies, because they had concealed the evidence, because they had planned, specifically, for the moment when someone would notice something was wrong and they needed 40 more seconds. They had planned for that 40 seconds 6 months in advance. The team leader was a human named Master Sergeant Dara Cole. She was 34 years old. She had been doing this for 12 years. She had gone into places like that Vreth formation 11 times before. She came out the same way she went in. Quiet, efficient, slightly annoyed that one part of the extraction had taken longer than the plan said it would. "We need to update the sewer route timing," she told her team afterward. "Took 8 seconds longer than the model." 8 seconds. The Vreth commander was dead. 12,000 soldiers had never known they were there, and Dara Cole was annoyed about 8 seconds. The Confederation would not understand what they had invited in for another 3 months. By then, the Vreth would already be afraid. Not of the Confederation, not of dreadnoughts or energy cannons or fleet formations, of something much smaller, of something they could not see coming, of 8 humans in the dark. The Vreth did not feel fear the way organic species did. This was something the Confederation xenobiologists had established early. The Vreth had no adrenaline equivalent, no elevated heart rate, no chemical panic response. They processed threat information and responded to it, but the processing was cold and methodical, the way a very large machine processes information. You could kill 100 Vreth and the remaining 1,000 would not flinch or hesitate. They would simply recalculate and continue. This made them extremely effective soldiers. It also meant that when, for the first time in the 11-year war, something changed in the Vreth behavioral data, something that the xenobiologists had no existing category for, it took them 3 weeks to agree on what they were seeing. The word they eventually used was caution. The Vreth were being careful. Commander Jev noticed it first, because it was his job to notice things in data that did not belong. He was not a particularly creative thinker, but he was thorough, and when he saw the same anomalous pattern appearing in 6 different Vreth fleet movements across 3 sectors, he flagged it. The Vreth were pulling their command ships back, not retreating. The line was holding. But their most valuable vessels, the ones carrying commanders, the ones with the most senior fleet coordinators, the ones that functioned as the brain of each formation, were moving to the rear, creating distance between themselves and the front. "They're protecting something," Jev told Vesoran. "They're protecting their leadership," Vesoran said. She had spent the last 3 months reading every human military document she could access, and she was starting to understand things she wished she did not understand. They're repositioning in response to a threat they can't see. What threat? She looked at the pattern on the screen. Vreth command ships pulling back across 6 sectors. All 6 sectors were adjacent to Confederation space. All 6 were within range of... She checked the distances. Yes. All 6 were within range of a small human staging base that had been quietly operational for 2 months. "The humans haven't done anything in those sectors," Jev said. "We would know." "No," Vesoran said slowly. "We would not know." That is precisely the point. What had actually happened in those 6 sectors was something the Confederation's sensors had entirely missed. In Sector 12, a 2-person human team had spent 3 weeks aboard a Vreth supply vessel. They had come aboard through a maintenance airlock while the vessel was docked at a Vreth resupply station. They had lived in a crawl space behind the ship's water filtration unit. They had eaten compressed rations designed to produce zero detectable food smell. They had observed, cataloged, and transmitted everything they learned about Vreth communication protocols, internal navigation systems, and command chain structure. Then they had left the same way they came in. The Vreth never knew they had been there. In Sector 14, A 4-person team had done something different. They had not observed. They had made very small, very precise alterations to the navigation beacons on 3 Vreth resupply routes. The alterations were subtle enough that they would not be caught in a standard diagnostic. Over the following weeks, Vreth supply ships began arriving at their destinations 6 to 9 hours late, because the routes they were following were slightly wrong. It was not enough to disrupt operations. It was enough to plant a seed of uncertainty. Something was wrong. They did not know what. In Sector 9, a 6-person team had done something that Vesseran would not find out about for another 2 months, and when she did find out, she sat very quietly for a long time. They had gotten onto a Vreth commander's ship. They had not killed the commander. They had put a passive signal relay behind a panel in the commander's personal communication bay, which would transmit everything the commander sent and received to a human intelligence hub, and then they had gotten off the ship. The relay was still there. The Vreth commander was still using the same communication bay. The humans had been reading a Vreth commander's private communications for 7 weeks. Director Voss briefed Vesseran personally. She had a habit of letting silences run a few seconds longer than was comfortable, and Vesseran had decided this was not an accident. "I want to understand something," Vesseran said. "Your people, the ones doing these operations, how many are there? Currently deployed? About 200. Vesseran stared. 200 individuals, against a Vreth force of, across all fronts, estimated at 12 million combatants. "Closer to 11 million now," Voss said. "But yes, 200 people are causing 12 million soldiers to rearrange their command structure. 200 people are making 12 million soldiers wonder what they missed." Voss leaned forward slightly. "Admiral, the Vreth are used to fighting armies. Big ships, big guns, big numbers. They understand that. They have a response for that. But they don't have a response for not knowing where the threat is coming from. They don't have a response for the possibility that we're already inside their wire." "Are you?" Voss smiled. It was a small, tired smile. "In 17 locations, yes." The silence that followed was several seconds longer than was comfortable. Master Sergeant Dara Kole was in one of those 17 locations. She was on a planet called Vreth 9 by the Confederation xenobiologists. It did not have a name in Vreth, as far as anyone could tell. The Vreth did not name things the way other species did. It was a dark, cold world with a thick atmosphere that played havoc with most standard sensors, which was exactly why Kole had chosen it. It was also home to a Vreth ground installation that the Confederation's Strategic Command had been trying to figure out for 3 years. Something important was being built there, or stored there, or processed there. The surveillance drones couldn't get close enough to find out because the Vreth shot them down. Kole had been on the planet for 11 days. She was alone. She had asked to go alone. Her team leader from the previous mission, a quiet man named Hector who had been doing this even longer than she had looked at the mission brief, and then looked at her, and said, "You're sure?" "I'm sure," she had said. "Alone is slower. Alone is less detectable." He had been quiet for a moment. "What's down there?" "I don't know yet. That's the point." The installation was bigger than the satellite imagery had suggested. Going on foot, moving only at night, resting in shallow hides, she dug herself into the hard ground during the day. It had taken Kole 9 days just to map the outer perimeter. It was not a weapons facility. It was not a supply depot. It was a communication hub. The largest she had ever seen. Towers that rose 40 meters into the thick atmosphere, packed with relay equipment, processing arrays, signal boosters, the kind of infrastructure that a species built when it needed to coordinate something very large across very long distances. She photographed everything. She recorded the signal patterns. She sat in a shallow hole 12 kilometers from the nearest Vreth soldier and ate a cold protein bar and thought about what she was looking at. The Vreth had 12 million soldiers across dozens of sectors. They moved with a coordination that had always seemed almost instinctive, but was not. It was managed, directed, from somewhere. This might be one of the places that direction came from. She sent the data. Then she started planning. The plan she came up with was, even by her standards, ambitious. She needed to get inside the hub, not to destroy it. Destroying it would just tell the Vreth something was wrong. She needed to get inside it, make a specific alteration, and get out again, in a way that left no trace. She needed 4 hours inside the facility. She needed to cross 12 kilometers of open ground, penetrate a security perimeter that had worked for 3 years against Confederation attempts, navigate an interior she had only mapped from outside, and do it alone. She gave herself a 60% chance of success. She had gone in on worse odds. On day 11, she moved. She moved at night, as she always did. But this night was different because the weather was wrong. A storm system was moving in from the northern continent, dropping the temperature and raising the wind. And Cole had learned years ago that weather was a tool like any other. Sensor systems struggled in high wind. Patrols reduced their range in bad weather. Guards were distracted by cold. She crossed the 12 kilometers in 4 hours, moving in a way that was not quite walking and not quite crawling, but something in between. A low, controlled movement that kept her silhouette under the height of the scrub vegetation. When she stopped, she froze completely. She was dressed in a suit that matched the thermal signature of the ground she was lying on. To a Vreth sensor sweep, she did not exist. She reached the outer perimeter and spent 40 minutes watching, not moving, watching. She had a good internal clock and a better memory, and she filed every piece of patrol data into a mental map until she could see the gaps. There were always gaps. Security systems were designed by beings who thought in straight lines, and Cole had long since stopped thinking in straight lines. She went through the gap. She was inside. She spent 3.5 hours in the facility. She did not describe what she saw in her after-action report with much detail. The report was a technical document, and she was not a descriptive writer. But she did include one line that Vesseran later read 4 times. The scale of the coordination apparatus suggests that the Vreth offensive is not ad hoc. It is centrally planned. They have a strategy. They have an endgame. This facility and others like it are the nervous system of that plan. Recommend priority collection and disruption. Centrally planned. An endgame. The Confederation had spent 11 years thinking the Vreth were a kind of force of nature. A tide. Something you could only survive, not defeat. One human sergeant, alone, in a hole in the ground on a dark, cold planet, had found evidence that there was a brain behind the tide. That meant there was something to cut. Cole left the facility the same way she entered. Clean. No trace. She walked 12 kilometers back through the storm and slept for 5 hours in her original hide, and then transmitted her full report. The response from Director Voss was exactly 3 words. Excellent. Come home. She was halfway to the extraction point when she stopped. Not because of a patrol or a sensor sweep. She stopped because she had noticed something, and in her experience, when she noticed something without knowing yet what she had noticed, it was important to stop and let the thing surface. She stood still in the dark for 2 full minutes. Then she understood what she had noticed. In the facility, during the 3.5 hours she had been inside, she had heard a sound on 3 separate occasions. A sound that did not match any Vreth vocalization in the database she had been given. Lower, more complex, something that had a pattern to it. She filed it in her memory. It would matter later. It would matter enormously. She did not know yet how much. Back on the Confederation's Central Command Station, Vesseran put the Cole report next to the 6 sectors of repositioned Vreth command ships and the 17 confirmed human intelligence operations currently running inside Vreth space, and looked at the full picture. The war was changing. It was not changing the way wars usually changed, with more ships, more soldiers, more territory won or lost. It was changing underneath, in the dark, in the space between what was known and what was suspected. 200 humans were somewhere inside 12 million enemies, and the 12 million were starting to feel it. Not fear, not yet. The Vreth did not feel fear. But something was beginning to move through their ranks, something that showed up in repositioned ships and altered patrol patterns and communications that analysts were starting to describe, carefully, as elevated vigilance. Vesseran had a word for what was beginning to happen to the Vreth. The word was unease. And she knew, from 11 years of fighting them, that unease was something she had never once seen in the Vreth before. Something was working. Something quiet. Something patient. Something that had been training for a very long time. Something that operated where ordinary rules didn't apply. She looked at the map. She thought about the sound Cole had noted, the sound that did not match any Vreth vocalization in the database. She pulled up the xenobiology team's channel. I need you to look at a new sound recording, she said, and I need you to tell me what it is as fast as possible. She did not yet know that the answer was going to change everything. Serve. The xenobiology team took 6 hours. 6 hours, and then the lead researcher, a sec, named Dr. Orva, called Vesoran on an encrypted line and asked her to sit down. Vesoran had 4 legs and did not require sitting, but she understood the phrase. She kept her voice level. Tell me. The sound Sergeant Cole recorded, Orva said. It is a Vreth vocalization. Cole checked it against the database. It is not in the database, Orva said. That is because we have never recorded it before. To our knowledge, no Confederation observer has ever been close enough to a Vreth in the right circumstances to record it. She paused. It is a Vreth distress call. Vesoran was very still for a moment. Distress. There is a more precise translation. The closest equivalent in Thalorian is something like, the call a herd animal makes when it becomes aware of a predator it cannot locate. The call a herd animal makes when it becomes aware of a predator it cannot locate. Cole had heard it 3 times in 3.5 hours, inside a facility with several hundred Vreth in it. 3.5 hours during which the Vreth had no idea a human was among them. They could sense something was wrong, Vesoran said, but they could not find her. That is my interpretation, yes, Orva said. Admiral, the Vreth were frightened. In 3 years of behavioral data, we have never recorded that sound. Vesoran brought the recording to Director Voss. Voss listened to it twice. She had her eyes closed while she listened, which was a thing Vesoran had noticed she did when she was thinking hard. Then she opened her eyes. Good, she said. Your soldier frightened them, Vesoran said, without them knowing she was there, without any engagement, just by being present. Yes, Director, the Vreth do not scare. We have established this. 11 years of data. Everything scares, Voss said, in a tone that was neither boastful nor harsh, just the flatness of someone stating a fact they learned a long time ago. You just have to find the right way in. And what is the right way in? Voss looked at her. You make them feel watched. You make them feel hunted. And then you make them find absolutely nothing when they look for you. She leaned back. We spent a lot of time figuring out how to do that to each other. Turns out it works on everyone. They had indeed spent a lot of time figuring out how to do that to each other. Vesoran had read the history. Most of it, she had read with a growing sense of unsettlement, because the thing that made human military history different from every other species in the Confederation was not the scale of their wars, or the technology of their weapons, or even the duration of their conflicts. It was the creativity. Every other species in the Confederation had developed warfare along fairly predictable lines. You built bigger weapons. You trained more soldiers. You developed better armor and faster ships. You fought. You won or lost. You adapted slightly. You fought again. Warfare was essentially an engineering problem, and you approached it the way you approached engineering problems. Humans had approached it differently. Humans had been creative about violence in a way that no other species had managed, and the reason, Vesoran had eventually concluded, was that humans had spent the entirety of their history fighting opponents who were exactly like themselves. Same biology, same psychology, same motivations, same fears. Humans knew what humans were afraid of, because they were afraid of those things themselves, and so every tactic they invented was specifically designed to exploit the soft places in beings who thought and felt the way they did. That should have meant those tactics wouldn't work on species that thought and felt differently, except it turned out the soft places were more universal than anyone had expected. Fear of the unseen, fear of being hunted, fear of the thing you cannot find, fear of the voice in the dark that you cannot trace to a body. These were very old fears, older than civilization. The Vreth had evolved somewhere, in some ancient environment, from something that had predators, something that had learned to fear the dark. The humans were very good at being the dark. Operation Deeproot was approved 3 weeks after the xenobiology report. Vesoran had not been told all the details. She had been told enough to know that it was larger than anything the humans had done so far, that it involved significantly more personnel, and that it was not an intelligence operation. It was a combat operation. She asked Director Voss for a briefing. 12 teams, Voss said. Simultaneous. 6 Vreth sectors. The targets are their communication relays, the ones that link their command structure together. We're going to go dark on them. You said you didn't want to destroy the relay on Vreth 9. That was before we had the full map. Voss pulled up a star chart. Cole found one. We've since found 11 more. They're not separate facilities, Admiral. They're nodes in a single network. They talk to each other. If you take down the right 3, in the right order, at the right time, she traced a path through the nodes. The signal loss cascades. The whole network loses coherence. Not forever. Maybe 48 hours before they can reroute. 48 hours of a Vreth force 12 million strong operating without central coordination. Vesseran thought about what that meant. What can the Confederation fleet do in 48 hours? She asked slowly. Voss smiled. It was a different kind of smile than the tired one Vesseran usually saw. That's the right question, she said. We need to talk to Grand Speaker Olun. The meeting with Olun was the strangest conversation Vesseran had ever been in, and she had been in some strange ones. Olun was 900 years old, and had seen 11 civilizations fall. He had a kind of sadness in him that was so old it had calcified, turned to something that looked almost like patience. He had stopped expecting to be surprised. He was surprised. He listened to the full briefing without speaking. 12 teams, 6 sectors, 48-hour window of Vreth network disruption, fleet positioning requirements, targets of opportunity during the window. When Voss finished, he was quiet for a very long time. You are telling me, he said finally, that 126 humans can create a strategic window that 12 million Vreth cannot create against us with 11 years of effort. Yes, Voss said, and you are confident in this. Confident enough to ask for the fleet. Olun looked at Vesseran. Your assessment, Admiral. Vesseran had thought about this for a while. She had been in the habit lately of thinking about things from multiple angles, because she had been reading too much human military history, and it was starting to affect the way she processed information. 6 months ago, she said, I would have told you this was impossible, based on everything we know about Vreth combat capability. And now? Now, I think the phrase, everything we know, was the problem. She paused. The humans don't fight based on what they know about the enemy. They fight based on what the enemy doesn't know about them. It's a different orientation, and it appears to be effective against opponents who have no framework for it. The Vreth have never faced this before, Olun said. No species has, Voss said quietly, and that's why it works. The 12 teams went in on a Thursday. 2 weeks of preparation, logistics, mapping, and contingency planning, and then on a Thursday, 126 humans entered Vreth-controlled space from 12 different insertion points, using 12 different methods, because using the same method twice was, in the language of the operations manual, a gift to the enemy. Vesseran was on the command station. She was watching a display screen that showed 12 small markers moving through territory the Confederation could not even get ships into without being destroyed. 12 small blue dots in a sea of red. She was aware that she was holding her breath, which was unusual for her species. Team 7 was led by a human named Chief Warrant Officer Farid Nassar. He had been in special operations for 14 years. He had bad knees and excellent hearing, and a memory for terrain that his instructors had once described as inhuman, which his team found funny. His target was Node 7, a relay station built into the side of a mountain on a Vreth-occupied moon. The mountain was a natural fortification. The station had been built into it over the course of what the intelligence analysts estimated was 3 years, which meant it was important, and it was meant to stay. Nassar had studied the satellite imagery for 6 days. He had identified 3 approach routes. He had eliminated 2 of them on the first day of ground reconnaissance, because the imagery was old and the Vreth had updated their outer perimeter in ways the satellites had not caught. The 3rd route required crossing an underground river. Underground, in the dark, in water cold enough to cause physical damage and extended exposure, with full equipment. Nassar looked at his team, 6 people. All of them had been doing some version of this for at least 8 years. Dry bags on everything, he said. We swim. Nobody complained. Nobody asked how long. They had all been in worse water than this. They swam for 40 minutes. On the other side was a cave system that Nassar had mapped from geological survey data he had requested from Confederation archives 3 weeks ago. Nobody in the archive had understood why a human military team needed geological surveys for this particular moon, But the data existed, and they had provided it. The cave system connected, after 2 kilometers of passage, to a natural ventilation shaft that ran up through the mountain to within 30 meters of the relay station's foundation. Nobody had used the cave system before because nobody had thought to look at the geological surveys. Nobody had looked at the geological surveys because looking for cave systems was not a standard military intelligence approach. Nasser had thought of it because, 12 years ago, he had read a book about human cave explorers from 3 centuries past, and he had filed the information the way he filed everything, somewhere accessible, connected to everything else. His team called this Nasser's library, the habit of storing completely unrelated information and then finding uses for it that nobody else would think of. His team also quietly credited Nasser's library with the fact that all of them were still alive. They reached the base of the ventilation shaft at 0300 local time. Nasser looked up. The shaft was roughly 1 meter in diameter, vertical, 30 meters of climb in the dark with full equipment. Single file, he said. Mira leads. Mira was the smallest member of the team. She was also the best climber. She went up first, found the handholds in the dark by touch, and had the rope secured in 11 minutes. They came up inside the relay station's utility sublevel. It was warm. It hummed with the energy of the relay equipment above them. Nassar checked his timer. They were ahead of schedule by 4 minutes. "We have time," he said. "Move slowly." They moved slowly. What happened in the next 3 hours, inside Node 7, was the kind of methodical, patient, precise work that looked boring from the outside and was absolutely terrifying from the inside. The team moved through a facility containing over 200 Vreth operatives. They were not trying to fight them. They were trying not to be seen, and when being not seen required stopping and pressing into a shadow and waiting for 6 minutes while a patrol route completed, they stopped and pressed into shadows and waited. The relay equipment was on the upper level. It was large, complex, and clearly important, because there were twice as many guards around it as anywhere else in the facility. Nasser studied the guard pattern from a position behind a coolant conduit that was loud enough to cover any small sounds his team made. He counted rotations. He timed them. He found the window. 90 seconds, twice an hour, when the upper level had a gap. They needed 4 minutes inside. "We split," Nassar said. He laid out the assignment. 2 people would create a reason for the guard to extend their patrol on one side of the room. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would trigger a full alert, just a small sound at the edge of sensor range. 4 people would go in during the gap and work. Nasser would watch. "If it goes wrong," he said, "you know what to do." His team knew what to do. They had planned for it going wrong 11 different ways. That was what the 2 weeks of preparation had been for. It did not go wrong. The 4 people went in. They worked. They were out in 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Not destroying the equipment, installing something in the equipment, something very small, very precise, that would, on a signal, cause the relay node to send the wrong data to every other node in the network instead of the right data. Incorrect positioning data, corrupted command signals, a quiet, precise lie inserted into the brain of the Vreth command structure. This was not Nasser's idea. This was a plan that had taken Confederation Signals intelligence analysts 4 months to develop, once Cole's initial discovery had given them the map. The humans had contributed the plan. The humans had contributed the capability. The Confederation had contributed the technical knowledge. It was, as Voss had told Olun quietly, what cooperation looked like. The team was back in the ventilation shaft 22 minutes after they had come up, climbing down, back into the cave, back into the cold underground river. 40 minutes of swimming. On the other side, Nasser dried his hands, checked that his equipment was intact, and opened a communication to the operations hub. "Node 7 is hot," he said. The code phrase meant the installation was complete. He received 2 responses. The first was a brief signal acknowledgement. The second, which came 30 seconds later, was 11 more code phrases, from 11 other teams. All 12 nodes were hot. Vessoran saw the 12 confirmations come in, and felt something she had not felt in 11 years of war. Not victory. Too early for that. Not relief. Too much still ahead. But something. Something she did not have a word for in Thalorian. She had been reading enough human documents that she reached for a human word instead. Hope. She looked at the clock. T-minus 6 hours until the signal was sent, and the network went dark. She opened a channel to Grand Speaker Olun. "It's time to move the fleet," she said. The old being looked at her from his screen. 900 years, 11 fallen civilizations. And now, for the first time, something that might be different. "Move it," he said. 6 hours later, the signal went out. All 12 nodes fired simultaneously. 12 small lies, inserted into 12 critical relay points, blooming outward through the Vreth communication network, like ink dropped into still water. The Vreth network did not shut down. It kept running. It just started running wrong. 48 hours. The Confederation fleet was already moving. And the 126 humans who had made it possible were already on their way out, moving through the dark, quiet as they had arrived, leaving nothing behind but 12 small pieces of hardware and the slowly spreading confusion of a 12 million strong army that had just lost its ability to talk to itself. In the Vreth communication hub on Vreth 9, the distress sound that Dr. Orva had translated rang out again. This time, it did not stop. The first 3 hours were quiet. The Confederation fleet moved into position, and the Vreth network ran its corrupted signals, and nothing visible happened. Because the corruption was subtle, and the Vreth were not stupid. They noticed something was wrong. They ran diagnostics. The diagnostics came back clean, because the small human devices inside the relay nodes were designed to be invisible to standard diagnostics. The Vreth ran the diagnostics again. Clean. They ran them a third time. Still clean. Somewhere in the Vreth command structure, decisions were being made, adjustments were being attempted, but the adjustments were based on data the network was sending, and the data the network was sending was wrong, and so the adjustments made things worse instead of better. Vesoran watched from the command station and thought of a word she had encountered in human military literature. Fog. The fog of war. The condition in which you are trying to make decisions with information that is incomplete, delayed, or simply false, and you do not know which parts are which. Human military theorists had written about this extensively, because humans had experienced it extensively, and some of them had gotten very good at creating it in their enemies. The Vreth were in the fog now, and the Confederation fleet was about to do something the Vreth had never experienced in 11 years of warfare against the Confederation. It was going to attack first. Grand Speaker Olun had approved an offensive strike package. 12 Confederation dreadnoughts, 40 cruisers, 200 fighters, targeting Vreth fleet concentrations in 6 sectors, coordinated simultaneously, starting at hour 3 of the network disruption. The logic was simple. The Vreth were used to defending against Confederation attacks while their own fleet movements were perfectly coordinated. Take away the coordination, and a defense that had been impenetrable for 11 years suddenly had gaps. What Vesoran had not fully anticipated was the scale of the gaps. The Vreth formations were built on constant communication. Every ship talked to every other ship continuously, updating positions, sharing threat data, coordinating movements. A Vreth fleet in full communication was like a single organism, fluid, responsive, nearly impossible to split or to outmaneuver. A Vreth fleet running on corrupted data was like 12 million soldiers, all acting on different maps. The engagement in Sector 12 was over in 4 hours. 43 Vreth ships destroyed, Confederation losses, 6 fighters, no capital ships. In 4 hours. In 11 years of fighting in Sector 12, the Confederation had lost over 200 ships and made no territorial gain. Sector 14 took longer, 6 hours. More complex fleet geometry, and one Vreth commander who seemed to recognize faster than most that something was wrong with the network and started acting on instinct rather than data. He was better operating on instinct than the others were operating on corrupted information. His section of the Vreth line held. Then it didn't. Not because the Confederation broke through, because the Vreth ships on either side of his position, acting on wrong data, moved to fill gaps that did not exist, and left real gaps in their wake, and the Confederation fighters poured through. The commander who had trusted his instincts over the network watched his flanks collapse and could do nothing about it, because by then, the correct orders he was sending could not get through the noise. He died at hour 9, when a Confederation dreadnought hit his command ship with everything it had. Vesseran watched the battle data come in from all 6 sectors and felt the thing she had not felt in 11 years getting stronger. Also, something she had not anticipated, something that showed up in the tactical data in a way that made her look twice. The Vreth were not just losing, they were confused. This was not something she had seen before. In 11 years of war, no matter how bad a battle got, the Vreth had always responded in a way that was coherent. They fell back in order. They regrouped methodically. They did not panic. They were panicking. Not individually. The Vreth as individuals were doing what they always did, following orders, executing commands, dying when they had to. But the orders were wrong. The commands contradicted each other. Ships were told to be in 2 places. Formations were told to hold positions that were already lost. Reinforcements were sent to sectors that did not need them and withheld from sectors that were collapsing. The entire battle intelligence system of a 12 million strong military force was telling it things that were not true. And for the first time, the Vreth looked like they did not know what to do. Master Sergeant Dara Kole was not in any of the 6 active sectors. She was in a 7th. This was not on the original operations plan. The original plan had 12 teams and 12 nodes, and a 48-hour window. Kole was the 13th team, which had not existed 6 weeks ago, and she was pursuing a target that had not been on any map 3 months ago. The target was the sound. Dr. Orva's team had spent 2 months analyzing the distress vocalization, and in the process, they had done something interesting. They had traced the pattern. The calls had been heard in multiple locations, all within range of a specific frequency band that appeared in the Vreth network's deep signal layer, a layer below the operational communications that nobody had looked at closely because it did not seem to be carrying meaningful data. It was carrying meaningful data. It was carrying something that looked, under enough analysis, like a heartbeat. Not a biological heartbeat. A signal. Regular, rhythmic, deep, coming from somewhere and propagating outward through the entire network. Every Vreth soldier, every ship, every installation was, without knowing it, receiving this signal continuously. Orva had come to Voss with her findings at 2 in the morning and had been unable to keep the tremor out of her voice. "It is not a communication system," she had said. "It is I do not have a precise translation. In SEC, we would call it a belonging signal. A signal that tells each receiver, you are part of something. You are not alone. The collective is still here." Voss had looked at her for a long time. "And if it stops?" "We do not know, but the distress calls occur when the signal is disrupted locally. I believe the Vreth require it, not physically, psychologically. They are more individual beings than they appear. The network is what holds them together. The signal is," Orva stopped, found the words. "It is what makes them feel that they are a we and not a collection of individuals." Voss had looked at the source data. "Where's it coming from?" she asked. The source was a single installation, ancient, by Confederation estimates, older than the war, older than any Vreth facility they had ever catalogued. It was on a planet so deep in Vreth territory that the Confederation had never gotten surveillance assets close to it. "Nobody can reach that," Jev had said when Voss showed him the location. Voss had pulled up a personnel file. "I know someone who can." Jev had looked at the file, then he had looked at the location, then back at the file. "This is the distance alone. She'll have 3 weeks," Voss said, "and she'll be alone so insertion is possible. One human, going in slow, with time and patience and very good instincts. And if she reaches it, she doesn't destroy it," Voss said. "If she destroys it, we learn nothing. She documents it, everything, every signal pattern, every architectural feature. We figure out what it is, and then we figure out what to do with it." There was a pause. "And if the Vreth find her?" Voss did not answer that directly. What she said was, she volunteered. She read the full brief. Jev looked at the file again, at the record of 11 successful deep penetration missions, of a Vreth commander killed, of a communication facility entered and exited alone, at a woman who had, by any measurable standard, been in situations that should have killed her a dozen times over. "She must be extraordinary," Jev said. "She's good," Voss said, "and she's stubborn as hell. Those 2 things together do a lot of work." Cole had been in Vreth deep territory for 19 days. The planet was nothing like Vreth 9. It was warm, covered in dense growth that she had no name for, not quite vegetation, more like an intricate layered surface of something organic and fibrous that grew in vast flat sheets and piled on itself until it was meters thick in places. It absorbed sound. It filtered light. She had decided, 3 days in, that she liked it. The installation was in the center of a wide depression, old enough that the organic growth had begun to incorporate its outer walls, threading through cracks and over surfaces, in a way that made it look almost natural from a distance. It was large, larger than anything she had been briefed to expect, and it was radiating something she could feel but could not see. Not radiation. Her sensors were normal. Not heat. Something else. Something that she noticed at the edge of her perception and could not quite locate directly. It reminded her of the feeling she got in very old stone buildings back on Earth. Large, empty places that had once held millions of people and still had something of them in the acoustics, in the air. Presence. Residual presence. She shook that off. She was a practical woman, and she did not have time for feelings about buildings. She started documenting what she found over 4 days of careful exterior observation, and then, on the 5th day, interior access, was something she did not have a framework for. The installation was not primarily technical. There was equipment, yes, signal arrays, deep emitters, power systems, but the building itself was something else. It was a place that had been built to be a place. The architecture had intention to it, in the way that buildings built by very old civilizations had intention, a care for space and proportion, and what a room felt like to stand in that went beyond function. The Vreth had built this to mean something. There were symbols on the walls. Not language exactly, or not primarily language. Patterns, shapes that repeated and repeated again, in ways that her eye kept trying to find a rule for. She photographed everything. In the center of the building, in a large circular space with a ceiling so high she could barely see it, there was a single structure, roughly cylindrical, roughly 2 meters tall, emitting the signal that Orva's team had traced. It was clearly very old. It was clearly still functional. Kole stood in front of it for a long time. She was a practical woman, but she had been in enough old places, in enough hard situations, to have a sense for when something was significant in a way that was bigger than the mission parameters. This was significant. She documented it. Every angle, every measurement her equipment could take. She spent 3 hours in that circular room, and she was so focused on what she was recording that she almost missed the movement at the edge of the room. Almost. She was behind a support pillar before the Vreth soldier completed its entry through the far door. She was still. She was silent. She matched her thermal signature to the stone she was pressed against. The soldier crossed the room, approached the central structure, and stood before it. And then it made the sound she had heard in the relay station. The distress call that Orva had translated as the call of a herd animal that senses a predator it cannot locate. But different this time. Here, in this room, next to this structure, different. Not a distress call. Something else. Something she had no translation for. The soldier stood there for a long time. Then it left. Kole stayed pressed against the pillar for 10 minutes after the soldier was gone. Then she continued documenting. The signal she sent back from day 5 of the interior documentation was the most significant intelligence transmission in the history of the war. Orva's team received it at 0400, and Orva called Voss at 0407 and did not apologize for the hour. "We know what it is," Orva said. Her voice was strange. "The central structure, the signal it's broadcasting. We know what it is. Tell me." "It is a memory," Orva said. "It is the oldest thing the Vreth have. It predates their spaceflight by thousands of years. It is the memory of where they came from, of what they were before they spread across the stars." She paused. "The signal is not a tactical communication. It is not military. It is. The closest concept in any Confederation language is ancestral home. The signal is the Vreth equivalent of knowing where you came from. The Vreth who receive it, everywhere in their territory, are receiving a continuous reminder that they are part of something ancient, something that existed before any of them, something that will exist after." She stopped. Voss waited. "If you shut it down," Orva said, "they do not become disorganized, like we thought. They do not become confused. That is not what the signal does. The signal is not coordination. It is She struggled. It is identity. It is the thing that tells them what they are. Voss was very quiet for a moment. If you shut it down, she said, what happens to them? Orva's answer was careful and very quiet. We do not know, she said. We do not know, because nothing has ever shut it down before. Cole's final transmission from the installation arrived 36 hours into the 48-hour window. She had finished her documentation. She had enough data to fill a year of analysis. She had everything Voss had asked for, and significantly more. Her message was brief. Full documentation transmitted. Moving to extraction. One note. The structure has a mechanical shutdown capability built in. Old. Manual. I can reach it. Your call. Voss read it twice. She thought about the Vreth soldier making the sound in the circular room. She thought about Orva's translation. Ancestral home. Identity. The thing that tells them what they are. She thought about what it would mean to take that away. She sat with it for a long time. Then she sent her reply. Do not touch it. Come home. What Voss did not know, and would not know until much later, was that the Vreth had been tracking Cole for 11 of her 19 days on the planet. They had not found her. They had found traces. Minute disturbances in the organic growth patterns. A thermal anomaly that lasted 4 seconds and then was gone. Something that was not quite a sound, caught by sensors so sensitive they were mostly used for geological data. They had sent more soldiers. They had increased patrols around the installation. They had run their best sensor sweeps. They had found nothing. And in the installation, in the circular room with the signal structure, the distress calls had been continuous. Something was there. Something was nearby. Something that should not be there. They could not find it. The thing you cannot locate. The predator you cannot see. For 19 days, Dara Cole had been the monster in the dark. And the Vreth, who did not fear, had been afraid. The 48-hour window ended. The 12 devices in the 12 relay nodes stopped transmitting their false data, and the Vreth network came back to itself, and the fleet movements that had been acting on corrupted information began to correct. The Confederation fleets, having done everything they could in the window, pulled back to defensible positions. The war was not over. Nobody had thought it would be over in 48 hours. But something had changed that was not going to change back. The final accounting, when Vesseran reviewed it 3 days after the window closed, was the most significant military outcome in 11 years of war. 211 Vreth ships destroyed, including 4 commander-class vessels, which brought the total of commander-class kills since the humans had arrived to 7. In 11 years before the humans, the Confederation had managed 0. 37 Vreth ground installations significantly damaged. 4 sectors that the Confederation had lost over the course of the war and had written off as permanently gone, contested, not reclaimed, contested. But contested meant a line. A line meant the Vreth advance had, for the first time in 11 years, stopped. Confederation losses in the 48-hour engagement, 19 ships, none above cruiser class, 743 crew. 743 was a terrible number. Vesseran held that number for a long time before she let herself look at anything else. 743 beings who had existed and did not now. She would not let the scale of the military success make that number small, because that was how you stopped seeing it. 743. She looked at it for a while. Then she looked at the rest. The human operations teams had all returned, all 126. Vesseran had not been told to expect this. She had read enough human military history to know that special operations at this scale and intensity produced significant casualties. She had modeled it, privately, and had expected to lose perhaps 20% of the deployed personnel. She had been wrong. 126 went in. 126 came back. She asked Director Voss about this, because she needed to understand it. They're trained to come back, Voss said simply. But the statistical probability is based on averages, Voss said. My people aren't average. They're selected because they're not average, and then they're trained for years on top of that. Statistics are for populations. What I have is individuals. She paused. And they wanted to come back. They had reasons. Wanting something does not change the mathematical likelihood. Sometimes it does, Voss said. That's not mysticism. That's performance science. It's been documented. People who have strong reasons to complete a thing complete it at higher rates than people who are just following orders. My people chose to be here. They chose this. There's a difference. Vesaran thought about that. In Thalorian military culture, soldiers were assigned, managed, deployed. The concept of a soldier who had chosen every element of their path, chosen the training, chosen the missions, chosen the team, was not something the Thalorian military framework had room for. It is a small thing, she said, the choosing. No, Voss said, it's not. Kole got back 4 days after the others. She had needed the extra time because the extraction route had been compromised. Vreth patrol patterns around the installation had been too heavy for her planned exit, and she had rerouted twice, which added distance and time. She had also eaten the last of her rations on day 21, and had spent 3 days moving on nothing but water. She came aboard the Confederation staging station in her extraction suit, which was the same suit she had worn for 24 days straight, and she was thin and slow, and her eyes had the particular quality of someone who has been alone and in danger for a very long time. She handed her equipment to the logistics team and went directly to the debrief without being asked. The debrief lasted 6 hours. When it was over, Voss found her in the small room that had been assigned as crew quarters and sat with her for a while without saying much. Kole ate steadily through a tray of food and did not speak either, and the silence was the comfortable kind. Eventually Voss said, "The documentation you brought back is going to take a year to fully analyze." Kole swallowed, drank something. "The structure in the center," she said. "Yeah. Don't touch it. I told you not to." Kale was quiet for a moment. "I know. I'm telling you again. It's not a weapon. It's not a strategic asset. It's..." She thought about the soldier standing in front of it, making the sound she had no translation for. "It's theirs. It's the only thing I've seen that's theirs. Everything else they have is tactical, functional, designed for warfare. That thing is something else." Voss looked at her. "The council is going to ask about it. Tell them it's not a weapon." Cole met her eyes. "We're not in the business of taking people's history away from them, even if they're the people trying to kill us." The two women looked at each other for a moment. "Okay," Voss said. The Vreth changed after the 48-hour window. It took 3 weeks to show up clearly in the behavioral data, but when it did, Preth flagged it immediately, and Commander Jev brought it to Vesaran within the hour. The Vreth had changed their communication protocols. All of them. The entire network. In 3 weeks, they had redesigned their signal architecture from the ground up. New encryption, new routing, new redundancy systems. It was not a small undertaking. It represented an enormous expenditure of resources and attention during an active war, and they had done it in 3 weeks. "That is impressive," Vesaran said. "It is," Jev said. "But look at this." He pointed to the secondary analysis. "The new protocols are defensive in design. Every modification is about detection, finding intrusions, identifying anomalies, quarantining corrupted data. They're not trying to become more powerful. They're trying to become harder to get into." Vesaran looked at the data. "They're defending against what we did, against what the humans did," Jev said. "The standard military threat they've been facing for 11 years. Our fleets, our ships, our guns. They're not adding new defense against that. They're adding new defense against small, precise, invisible intrusion. They're defending against people," Vesaran said slowly. "Not weapons." "Yes," Jev was quiet for a moment. "Admiral, the Vreth have been at war for a very long time. They have a response for everything we have thrown at them. They adapted to our weapons, our tactics, our fleet structures. They have never had to adapt to..." He stopped, found the word. "Personnel. Human personnel. 126 individuals who had walked through 12 million soldiers and left nothing behind. The Vreth were not defending against the Confederation's military machine. They were defending against the humans." The council meeting 3 weeks after the window was the largest session in 11 years. Every member species with representatives present. Grand Speaker Oluan, looking older, and also, somehow, lighter than he usually did, as if the calcified sadness had cracked somewhere, and something was coming through. Director Voss presented the full operational summary. She was brief and clinical, and answered every question directly. Then, Olun asked the question everyone was thinking about. "What do you need," he said, "to win this war?" The room was very quiet. Voss looked at the Grand Speaker. Then she looked around the room, at the Thalorian military commanders, the SEC analysts, the representatives of species who had lost worlds, who had evacuated billions of people, who had spent 11 years retreating one sector at a time. "More time," she said. "And more of my people." "How many more?" "It depends on what you want to accomplish and how fast you want to accomplish it." She pulled up a map. "With 200 people, we disrupted their network for 48 hours and created a window that your fleets used. With 1,000 people, we can maintain disruption indefinitely, run sustained targeting of their command structure, and systematically dismantle their strategic coordination capacity." She traced lines on the map. "With 5,000 people, we don't just dismantle it, we rebuild it. We feed them what we want them to know. We turn their own network into a tool." The room absorbed this. "You are describing," said a Thalorian general named Brex, who had fought the Vreth for 9 years, and had the kind of face that had stopped being surprised a long time ago, using their own communications against them. "We're describing controlling what they know," Voss said, "and what they don't know, and what they think they know that isn't true." She let that sit. "There are species throughout your history who have done something similar to each other. Psychological operations, denial and deception, information warfare. You have the concepts, you just haven't scaled them to this. Because it requires people who can get inside their space," Brex said. "Yes. And you can train 5,000 such people." "We can train a lot more than 5,000 such people," Voss said. "We have been training versions of these people for a very long time. We just didn't have an enemy worth sending them against." Nobody in the room quite knew how to take that. Brex looked at her for a moment, and then, very slowly, made a sound that Vessoran identified after a moment as laughter. "Not much, but some." "How long to train 5,000 to your standard?" Olun asked. 2 years, Voss said, "minimum. And in that time, we operate with what we have. We don't stop, we don't wait. 200 people caused all of this." She gestured at the outcome data on the screen behind her. 200 people who have been doing this for a long time can do a great deal in 2 years. She met Olun's eyes. "We're very patient, Grand Speaker. We've been doing this for a long time. The 2 years that followed were not easy." The war did not stop. The Vreth adapted, as Vessoran had noted, and some of their adaptations were effective. There were engagements where the human teams encountered new defenses and had to pull back. There were missions that went wrong, in ways that the contingency planning had not covered. There were losses. Vessoran remembered the losses the way she remembered the 743 from the window, not as statistics, as individuals. The Vreth also, in the second year, demonstrated something new. Their commanders began traveling with personal protective details that were, by Confederation analysis, modeled on the patterns that made the humans difficult to detect. Small numbers, irregular movement, non-standard behaviors. They were trying to become harder to find. Not their ships, their leaders, their most important individuals. "They're modeling themselves on us," Kole said, when Vessoran showed her the data. Kole had been promoted twice in 18 months, and was now running a training program as well as active missions, which she hated and was very good at. "Is that a problem?" Vessoran asked. "No," Kole said, and there was something in her voice, not cruel, just matter of fact. "Because they're doing it from the outside. We do it from the inside. They can learn the behaviors. They can't learn the why." "What is the why?" Kole thought about it for a moment. "We do this because it's the most effective way to fight, and we are very interested in winning. But also," she paused, "when you're in the field for a long time, in a bad place, you're not thinking about the war. You're thinking about the 6 people with you. You're thinking about getting them home. We've been building teams for a long time. We're very good at it." She looked at the Vreth protective detail data. The Vreth are still thinking about the collective. Their collective is enormous. 12 million. When you're part of something 12 million strong, the 7 people standing next to you are just the nearest part of it. And when you're part of something 7 strong, those 7 people are everything. She looked at Vessoran steadily. "You would do almost anything to get those 7 people home, and almost anything covers a lot of ground. In the 20th month, The first of the 5,000-strong training cohort completed their qualification. They were not the same as Cole's people. They were younger, mostly, less experienced. They had trained hard, but they had not yet learned the things that could only be learned by being in the field and coming back. They would learn. The Confederation species had supplied many of them, not just humans. Seku had survived when their homeworld was taken. Thalorian volunteers who had asked, quietly, to train the human way. A handful of beings from species that had barely survived the war's first years, who had nothing to lose and something to prove. Cole ran them through their final assessment herself. She was not easy on them. She had not been easy on herself for 12 years, and she did not believe in easy. She believed in knowing exactly what you were capable of, and knowing it completely, so that when you were in the field in a bad place you did not have to wonder. She watched the last candidate complete the final exercise at 0300, having been awake for 36 hours, having moved through a simulated Vreth facility without triggering a single sensor, having extracted a simulated high-value target, and reached the extraction point with a simulated team of 6 intact. The candidate was a young Sek. She had lost her family when her homeworld fell. She had been 16 years old. Now she was 19 and she was very, very good. She reached Cole's position and reported. Cole looked at her for a moment. Then she said, "Qualified." The young Sek's expression did not change much. That was good. That was right. You did not celebrate finishing the training. You finished the training, and then you used what you had learned. "What's next?" the young Sek asked. "Deployment," Cole said. "And then getting back." The Vreth made their final large-scale offensive push in month 22. They had been quiet for almost 6 months, which the intelligence teams had flagged as unusual. The quiet, Voss had told the council, was not planning for defeat. It was planning. Something was coming. What came was a coordinated multi-sector push, larger than anything the Vreth had attempted in 3 years. New ships, new formations, adapted tactics. They had not been idle. They had been learning, rebuilding, reconsidering. They had also, the intelligence data suggested, spent the 6 months trying to purge whatever human assets might be inside their space. They had not found them all. This was discovered when the offensive began, and 3 things happened simultaneously that could not be explained by Vreth planning. First, the lead commander-class vessel of the offensive's central column suffered a complete navigation system failure that sent it off course for 40 minutes, exactly long enough for the Confederation's main defensive line to redirect its heaviest assets. Second, the Vreth supply chain for the push's eastern flank was found to be carrying fuel that had been subtly contaminated. Not enough to be detected in standard testing, enough to reduce engine efficiency by 12% when sustained burn was required. Third, the most senior Vreth commander coordinating the overall push made decisions that were, in retrospect, clearly based on incorrect positioning data. He sent reserves to the wrong sectors. He reinforced where there was no pressure. He left gaps in the exact places the Confederation counterattack hit. All 3 of these things had been set up over the preceding 6 months, by humans who had been inside Vreth space the entire time. The offensive failed. Not barely. Not by a narrow margin that required every Confederation asset and every ounce of luck and 12 more hours of fighting. It failed within the first 18 hours because the coordination it depended on was not there, because the supply chain was compromised, because the commander who should have adapted and redirected the push was working from a false picture of reality. In the aftermath, Vreth losses were enormous. In the disorganized retreat that followed the offensive's collapse, Confederation forces, now with 2 years of experience fighting alongside and behind and inside the human operational approach, applied relentless pressure. They did not let the Vreth regroup. That was new. In 11 years of war, the Confederation had always let the Vreth regroup because they had been too exhausted and too depleted to do otherwise. Now they pressed. The line moved. Not everywhere, not all at once, but it moved. Vessoron was on the command station when the central sector line moved for the first time in 8 years. She had not thought she would ever see that. She sat with it for a moment. Then she thought about what it had taken. 200 people, at first, then 1,000, now 5,000, and growing. 2 years of operations inside enemy space that the Vreth could sense and could not find. A war that had been about ships and weapons and territory, turning into something quieter and stranger and more intimate. A contest of knowledge, of patience, of the ability to be invisible in the most hostile environment imaginable. She thought about Kole on a dark, cold planet, alone, for 19 days. She thought about 8 people going into 12,000. She thought about the sound the Vreth made when they knew something was there and could not find it. Grand Speaker Oluin, 900 years old and counting, called the council together on the day the central sector line moved. He did not make a speech. He was not given to speeches. He looked at his council and he said one thing. We are going to win this war. He had not said that before. Not once in 11 years. He had spoken of survival, of resistance, of protecting what remained, not of winning. The room was very quiet. Tell me, he said, what we owe the humans. Veseran, who had been asked to this session specifically, said, they will tell you they want nothing, that this is mutual aid, that the Vreth are a threat to them as much as to the rest of us. And is that true? Yes. But it is not the whole truth. She thought about how to say the rest. They also want to finish something they started. They are, she paused, they are very good at what they do, and they have spent a very long time not having an enemy that required everything they had. Now they have one. She thought of Kole's face in the debrief after 24 days alone in enemy territory. Thin and slow and quiet, eating steadily, no drama, just the work. They find this meaningful. I do not say that lightly. It is the most honest thing I can tell you about them. They find war meaningful, Oluin said. They find this meaningful. There is a difference. Ask them to fight a war for conquest or for resources, and I do not think they would be here. Ask them to fight a war against something that is trying to end civilization, and they will send you the quiet ones. She looked at the Grand Speaker. I have stopped trying to fully understand it. I have started simply being grateful for it. Oluin was quiet for a moment. What does Director Voss need? He asked. More time, Veseran said. The same answer Voss had given 2 years ago. And she will not ask you for more. So I am asking on her behalf. Give her more of everything. Resources, intelligence access, personnel from every species that can be trained, and trust. She has earned the trust. Oluin looked at her for a long time. Done, he said. The war lasted another 4 years. It did not end with a single great battle or a dramatic final engagement. It ended the way the humans had been prosecuting it, in increments, in the dark, in the quiet accumulation of information and precision and patience. The Vreth network became increasingly unreliable. Their commanders became increasingly isolated. Their coordination, which had been the foundation of everything, corroded. They were still formidable. They were still dangerous. But they were no longer the force of nature they had once seemed. They had a brain, and the brain could be confused, and the brain could be misled, and the brain could be slowly, carefully, methodically taken apart by people who had been doing exactly this, to each other, for centuries. The final Vreth fleet, in the final sector, stopped its advance on a day in the 4th year that would later be made into a holiday by half the Confederation. It did not surrender. The Vreth did not surrender. What it did was stop. And in the absence of coordination and supply and command signal, and the deep ancestral signal from an installation that was now surrounded by Confederation forces, the installation that Kole had documented, and that the Confederation had since protected with a cordon, as Voss had requested, without entering or interfering, only surrounding, the Vreth forces in the final sector did something none of them had ever done before. They went silent. Not fled, not surrendered. Silent. The xenobiologists, watching the behavioral data, would spend years arguing about what it meant, whether it was defeat or something else, whether the Vreth had simply stopped, or had made a choice, or had entered a state that their biology required. Kole had a theory. She kept it to herself. She thought they had finally heard the signal clearly, the ancestral signal from the installation, the one that said, "You are part of something. You are not alone. The collective is still here." She thought that without the war, without the coordination and the corruption and the constant noise of military operation, they had finally been able to hear it properly. She thought maybe that was enough. Maybe that was what they had needed. She did not say this to anyone except Voss, who listened without speaking. Then Voss said, "Maybe." Master Sergeant Dara Cole, on the day the war ended, was 42 years old. She had run 219 operations. She had been deployed inside enemy space for a combined total of 4 years and 7 months. She had trained 312 people who were now doing what she did. She was sitting in a briefing room when the final confirmation came through, not on the command bridge. In a briefing room, because she had been in the middle of planning something, and when the news came she stopped planning and sat with it. She had been waiting for this for a long time. It did not feel the way she had expected. It felt very quiet. It felt like finishing something that had taken everything you had for a very long time and sitting down in the aftermath. Not empty, not triumphant, just the particular quality of a long, hard thing that was over. She thought about the Vreth soldier in the circular room. She thought about the sound it had made. She sat with that for a while. Then she picked up her planning documents, because there would be things to do in the aftermath, and there always would be, and being still, when there were things to do, was not something she was good at. She got back to work. Vesseron's final report on the human contribution to the war would be studied by Confederation military historians for generations. It was long. It covered everything: the operations, the tactics, the training approaches, the organizational philosophy. It was thorough and precise and deeply useful. But the part that was quoted most often was the last paragraph. The last paragraph was not precise or technical. It was the closest thing to personal reflection that Vesseron had ever committed to an official document. She had written, "We invited humans into this war because we had nothing left to lose. We gave them the sectors we had abandoned. We expected nothing. What they showed us was not what we had modeled or anticipated. They did not bring us more ships or more weapons or more soldiers in the conventional sense. They brought us something we had forgotten after 11 years of retreat, the knowledge that the enemy can be found inside, that no fortress is sealed if someone patient and quiet enough is looking for the gap, that the most precise instrument in any war is not a weapon. It is a person who has decided to act, and who has prepared for this moment for longer than the enemy can imagine. We called them special forces. The Vreth called them many things. In the end, the most common phrase, repeated in their communications in the final 2 years, translates most closely as, the ones who are already here. I think that is the most accurate description I have encountered. They were already here, in the dark, in the silence, watching, and waiting, and knowing things we did not know. I am glad they were on our side.